The briefing room at Camp Pendleton fell silent the moment the door opened. Not because anyone important had arrived at least. That's what the Marines assumed. The woman who stepped through wore woodland camouflage utilities with no rank insignia visible on her chest, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her face unremarkable in its composure. She carried a single manila folder and moved with the unhurried economy of someone who had nowhere to prove and everything to command. The Marines, 12 of them, all enlisted, all pumped with the particular arrogance that comes from surviving Hell Week and wearing the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor, barely glanced up from their pre-deployment brief. One of them, a corporal with a fresh haircut and an attitude problem, was blocking the aisle between the folding chairs. She stopped, waited. He didn't move. "Excuse me," she said quietly. He looked her up and down with the dismissive efficiency of someone who had already decided she didn't matter. "You lost, ma'am." The word dripped with sarcasm. She didn't reply, just stood there, folder under one arm, eyes level. The corporal smirked, turned to his buddy, and muttered something that got a laugh. Then he shifted his weight, not stepping aside but leaning into her space. That's when he made his mistake. He put his hand on her shoulder and shoved. Not hard, just enough to move her back a step, enough to make a point. The room didn't gasp. Nobody jumped up. This was a place where hierarchy mattered, and she wasn't wearing anything that mattered, except she didn't stumble. She absorbed the contact, reset her footing, and looked at him with the kind of patience that comes from watching men underestimate you for 2 decades. "Do you know who I am?" she asked. Her voice was still quiet. The corporal grinned. "No, ma'am, I don't." "Then sit down," she said, "and you're about to find out." The briefing officer at the front of the room, a captain with 3 rows of ribbons and a face that had seen too many deployments, cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, on your feet." The Marines stood, confused, sluggish. The captain's voice hardened. "I said on your feet, attention." They snapped upright. The woman walked to the front of the room, set the folder on the podium, and turned to face them. The captain stepped aside. She didn't introduce herself. Didn't need to. Because the screen behind her flickered to life, and the first slide showed a photograph. Her, 10 years younger, standing on the deck of an aircraft carrier in a flight suit, helmet under one arm, the tail of an FA-18 Super Hornet visible behind her. The next slide showed a different image. Same woman, different uniform. Navy working uniform type III. The Trident insignia on her chest wasn't hers, it belonged to the men she commanded. NSW. Naval Special Warfare. The corporal's face drained of color. The woman let the silence stretch, let them absorb what they were looking at, let the weight of their mistake settle into their bones. Then she spoke. "My name is Commander Myra Kine. I'm the officer in charge of SEAL Team 7's Air Operations Division. You're looking at me because your lives depend on close air support, and I'm the one who decides if you get it." She paused. "And before any of you ask, yes, I can fly the platform. Yes, I've been downrange. And no, I don't care what you think about women in combat." She opened the folder. "Now sit down and pay attention, because in 72 hours you're inserting into the Korengal Valley, and I'm the only thing standing between you and a body bag." The Marine sat. The corporal didn't look up. Myra Kine had their attention now, but attention wasn't respect. Respect had to be earned in blood, sweat, and the kind of split-second decisions that turned missions into legends or funerals into closed casket affairs. She clicked to the next slide. It showed a topographical map of eastern Afghanistan, the Korengal Valley carved into the mountains like a scar. "Your mission," she said, "is to capture or kill a high-value target operating out of a compound here." She pointed to a cluster of structures nestled into a ridgeline. "The problem is that the compound sits in a bowl, steep terrain on 3 sides, open ground on the approach. No cover, no concealment. The only way you survive the insertion is if I can suppress enemy positions on the high ground before you hit the ground." She let that sink in. "The other problem is that the weather window is closing. You've got a 6-hour window of clear skies. After that, cloud cover moves in and I'm flying blind. If I can't see the target, I can't shoot. If I can't shoot, you're walking into a meat grinder." One of the Marines, a sergeant with a scar running through his eyebrow, raised his hand. "Ma'am, what platform are you flying?" "FA-18E Super Hornet," Myra said. "Carrier-based multi-role strike fighter. I'll be launching from the USS Theodore Roosevelt in the Arabian Sea. Flight time to your position is 40 minutes. Loiter time over target is 20 minutes before I need to refuel. That means you get 1 pass, maybe 2 if you're lucky. Make it count." The sergeant nodded, but his expression didn't change. Myra knew what he was thinking. Every grunt thought the same thing when they heard a pilot was supporting them. Flyboys don't understand the ground, they don't feel the bullets, they don't know what it's like to bleed in the dirt. And female pilots. That added another layer of doubt. Another reason to second-guess whether she'd hold the line when things went sideways. She clicked to the next slide. This is the target. The face that appeared on the screen was weathered, hard, the kind of face that belonged to a man who had spent his life in the mountains. His name is Qadir Ahmadi, former Mujahideen, current Taliban commander. He's responsible for coordinating IED networks across 3 provinces. He's also the reason your last patrol lost 2 men to a roadside bomb 3 weeks ago. The room shifted. The Marines leaned forward. This wasn't theoretical anymore, this was personal. "Ahmadi knows you're coming," Myra continued. "He's been moving positions every 72 hours, but we've got signals intelligence that puts him at this compound tomorrow night. The window is tight. If we miss him, he disappears for another 6 months and more of your brothers die." She turned off the projector. "So here's how this works. You tell me what you need, I tell you what I can deliver, and we both walk away alive." The sergeant spoke again. "We need guns on target before we hit the ground. 30mm cannon, danger close. If there's enemy contact on the ridgeline, we need you to light them up before they light us up." Myra nodded. "I can do that, but danger close means within 200 meters of your position. If I'm off by 50 feet, I'm putting rounds into your squad. You comfortable with that?" The sergeant didn't hesitate. "If you're good, ma'am, we're good." "I'm good," Myra said. And she meant it. She'd flown 83 combat missions over Afghanistan and Iraq, delivered ordnance within spitting distance of friendly forces more times than she could count, and never once put steel on the wrong target. But these Marines didn't know that. They were still looking at her and seeing a woman who didn't belong. She'd spent her entire career fighting that perception. It started at the Naval Academy, where her classmates assumed she'd wash out before summer ended. It continued through flight school, where her instructors questioned whether she had the physical strength to handle a fighter jet under G-forces that could crush a human body. And it followed her into the fleet, where squadron mates treated her like a mascot instead of a pilot until she proved again and again that she could fly as well as any of them, shoot as straight, and come home when others didn't. The real test came during her 3rd deployment over the skis of Fallujah. She'd been flying close air support for a Marine rifle company pinned down in an urban firefight. The forward air controller on the ground was screaming into the radio, rounds cracking over his head, his voice breaking with the kind of fear that only comes when you know you're about to die. Myra had been low on fuel, her wingman already heading back to the carrier, but she stayed. She rolled in hot, dropped 2 500-pound JDAMs onto a building crawling with insurgents, and pulled out of the dive so low that her jet's exhaust scorched the rooftops. The Marines walked out alive. And when they found out the pilot who saved them was a woman, some of them didn't believe it, but the ones who mattered did. The forward air controller sent her a handwritten letter 3 months later. It said, "You didn't hesitate, you didn't flinch. You came when we needed you and you didn't leave until we were safe. That's all that matters." She kept that letter in her locker, looked at it on the days when the doubters got too loud. The briefing wrapped up an hour later. Myra answered every question the Marines had, walked them through the engagement sequence, showed them maps and photos and firing solutions until they ran out of things to ask. By the end, they were nodding, taking notes, treating her like the professional she was. But the corporal who shoved her still hadn't looked her in the eye. As the Marines filed out, Myra stayed at the podium, packing up her folder. The captain approached, his expression unreadable. "You handled that well," he said. Myra shrugged. "It's not the first time. Still, you didn't have to take the disrespect. You could have pulled rank, dressed him down in front of everyone." "I could have," Myra agreed. "But then they would have followed me out of fear, not trust, and trust is what keeps them alive." The captain studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good luck out there, Commander." Luck's got nothing to do with it, Myra said. She walked out of the briefing room into the California sun and didn't look back. In 72 hours, she'd be strapped into the cockpit of an FA-18, screaming through the night sky over Afghanistan, and the Marines who doubted her would be watching her work. They'd see the jet coming low and fast, see the cannon spit fire, see the enemy positions disappear in clouds of dust and shrapnel, and they'd know finally that Commander Myra Kine wasn't just a pilot. She was their lifeline. The only problem was that the mission was already going sideways, and nobody knew it yet. 72 hours later, Myra sat in the cockpit of her FA-18E Super Hornet on the deck of the USS Theodore Roosevelt, running through her pre-flight checklist. The night was black, the kind of darkness that only exists over open ocean, and the carrier deck was a chaos of noise and light jet engines screaming, catapult crews signaling with glow sticks, ordnance handlers making final checks on the weapons pylons. Myra's jet was loaded heavy, 2 AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles for air-to-air defense, 2 AIM-120 AMRAAMs for beyond visual range threats, and a 20 M61 Vulcan cannon with 500 rounds of ammunition. It wasn't the bombs that mattered tonight, it was the gun. Danger close meant precision, and precision meant putting bullets exactly where they needed to be, no margin for error. She checked her kneeboard, reviewed the mission brief one last time, and keyed her radio. Strike, this is Sabre 2-1 ready for launch. Sabre 2-1 strike, you are cleared for Catapult 2, wind 090 at 15 knots, altimeter 29902, contact departure on button 4 after launch. Sabre 2-1 copies. Myra advanced the throttles, felt the twin engines of the Super Hornet roar to life, the vibration rattling through the airframe and into her bones. The catapult officer gave the signal. She saluted. The catapult fired. The jet went from 0 to 150 knots in 2 seconds, the G-forces slamming her back into the seat, the ocean rushing up beneath her. And then she was airborne, climbing into the darkness, the carrier shrinking to a pinprick of light behind her. The flight to the Korengal Valley took 40 minutes, the jet cutting through the night at 30,000 feet, Myra alone with her thoughts and the hum of the engines. She checked her fuel, her weapon systems, her navigation. Everything was green, but something felt wrong. She couldn't put her finger on it, just a nagging sensation in the back of her mind, the same instinct that had kept her alive through 83 combat missions. She keyed her radio. Overlord, this is Sabre 2-1, request sitrep on ground element. Sabre 2-1, Overlord, ground element is on schedule, insertion in 15 minutes, no change to mission parameters. Copy, Overlord. But Myra's gut said otherwise. She descended to 20,000 feet, began her approach to the target area, and switched her radio to the tactical frequency where the Marines would be calling for support. Anvil 1-6, this is Sabre 2-1, checking in on station, playtime 20 minutes, rifle and gun ready for tasking. Silence. Anvil 1-6, Sabre 2-1, radio check. More silence. Myra frowned. The forward air controller should have responded immediately. She checked her radio settings, confirmed she was on the correct frequency, and tried again. Any Anvil call sign, this is Sabre 2-1, how copy? Still nothing. Then faintly buried under static, Sabre, contact. Taking fire, the transmission cut off. Myra's pulse spiked. She descended to 15,000 feet, switched her targeting pod to infrared, and began scanning the valley below. What she saw made her blood run cold. The Marines were supposed to be inserting via helicopter onto a ridgeline 2 kilometers from the target compound. But the thermal image on her display showed 2 helicopters on the ground, rotors still turning, and a firefight erupting around them. Muzzle flashes lit up the infrared screen like fireflies, dozens of them, concentrated on the high ground overlooking the landing zone. The Marines were pinned. Worse, one of the helicopters was burning. Myra could see figures scrambling out of the wreckage, dragging casualties into cover, and the enemy fire was intensifying. She keyed her radio. Overlord, Sabre 2-1, ground element is in contact, request immediate CAS, over. Sabre 2-1, Overlord, stand by. Negative, Overlord, I don't have time to stand by. Marines are taking casualties, I need clearance to engage. Saber 2-1, we're working the clearance, stand by. Myra swore under her breath. Clearance meant lawyers, meant command officers sitting in air-conditioned rooms 6,000 miles away trying to decide if the risk was acceptable, meant watching good men die while bureaucrats debated rules of engagement. She descended to 10,000 feet, rolled inverted to get a better look at the battlefield, and made her decision. Overlord, Saber 2-1 is engaging. Saber 2-1, you do not have clearance to engage, I say again. You do not. Myra switched off the command frequency. She knew what she was doing, knew the cost if she was wrong, but she also knew that those Marines on the ground were the same men who sat in that briefing room 3 days ago, the same men who doubted her, and she'd be damned if she let them die because someone in a rear-echelon headquarters couldn't make a decision. She selected her cannon, armed the weapon, and rolled in hot. The FA-18 screamed down from 10,000 feet, the airspeed indicator climbing past 400 knots, the altimeter unwinding, the targeting reticle on her heads-up display drifting toward the cluster of enemy positions on the ridgeline. At 3,000 feet, she squeezed the trigger. The M61 Vulcan cannon roared, 6,000 rounds per minute, the jet shuddering as the 20mm shells tore through the air and slammed into the mountainside. Dirt and rock exploded upward, bodies tumbled, and the muzzle flashes on the ridgeline went dark. Myra pulled out of the dive, her vision graying at the edges as the G-forces peaked and climbed back to altitude. She rolled the jet, looked down, and saw the Marines moving. They were out of the kill zone, dragging their wounded toward the second helicopter, and the enemy fire had stopped. Her radio crackled to life. Saber 2-1, Anvil 1-6, good hits, enemy suppressed, we're moving to secondary LZ, request you stay on station. Myra grinned. Anvil 1-6, Saber 2-1, roger, I'm not going anywhere. She checked her fuel. 12 minutes of playtime left. Enough for one more gun run, maybe two if she pushed it. Enough to get the Marines out alive. The corporal who shoved her was down there somewhere, bleeding or scared or both, and Myra didn't care. She had a job to do and she was going to do it. But the night wasn't over yet, and the enemy wasn't done fighting. The second helicopter lifted off from the landing zone, rotors beating the air. The Marines crammed inside with their wounded, and Myra circled overhead, her eyes locked on the thermal display. The enemy was regrouping. She could see them moving through the trees, small clusters of heat signatures converging on the ridgeline, preparing for another ambush. She keyed her radio. Anvil 1-6, Saber 2-1, I've got enemy movement, grid November Bravo 34789 approximately 20 personnel. Advise if you want me to engage. The forward air controller's voice came through the static, steady now, professional. Saber 2-1, Anvil 1-6, confirm November Bravo 34789 friendlies are clear of that grid, you are cleared hot. Saber 2-1, in hot from the south. Myra rolled the jet inverted again, nosed over into a dive and lined up the shot. The enemy was moving through a draw, a natural choke point, and if she timed it right she could hit them all in one pass. At 5,000 feet she opened fire. The cannon stitched the hillside, the rounds walking through the draw like a saw blade, and the thermal signatures on her display blinked out one by one. She pulled up, climbed, and checked her fuel. 8 minutes left. Anvil 1-6, Saber 2-1, target destroyed. I'm Winchester on gun, bingo, fuel and 8 mics will remain on station until you're clear. Saber 2-1, Anvil 1-6, solid copy, we're 5 mics from secondary LZ, appreciate the assist. Myra didn't respond. Didn't need to. The Marines were safe, the mission was salvageable, and she'd done what she came to do. But her radio crackled again, and this time it wasn't the forward air controller. It was Overlord. Saber 2-1, Overlord, you are ordered to RTB immediately. You engaged without clearance. We need you back on deck for debrief. Myra's jaw tightened. She knew this was coming. Knew that the moment she switched off the command frequency and engaged without authorization, she was putting her career on the line. But she also knew that if she'd waited for clearance, those Marines would be dead. She keyed her radio. Overlord, Saber 2-1 negative, I am staying on station until ground element is clear. You can debrief me when they're safe. Saber 2-1, this is not a request. This is a direct order. RTB immediately. Overlord, with respect, I'll RTB when the Marines are off the ground, not a second before. The radio went silent. Myra knew what that meant. She just told a superior officer to shove it, and there would be consequences. But she didn't care. She'd spent her entire career being told she didn't belong, being questioned and doubted and second-guessed, and she was done proving herself to people who would never believe in her anyway. She circled the valley, watched the helicopter land at the secondary LZ, watched the Marines load up and lift off, and only when they were clear of the mountains and heading back to base did she key her radio. Overlord, Saber 2-1, ground element is clear. I am RTB, playtime 0 mics, fuel state is bingo. Saber 2-1, Overlord, Roger, contact Marshall on button 6. Myra switched frequencies, began her climb back to altitude, and pointed the nose of her jet toward the carrier. The flight back was quiet. No radio chatter, no threats, just the sound of the engines and the darkness outside the canopy. She had time to think, time to replay the mission in her head, time to wonder if she'd made the right call. By the time she trapped on the carrier deck, the sun was rising. The debrief happened 2 hours later in the Admiral's stateroom. Myra stood at attention, still in her flight suit, her helmet bag at her feet, facing 3 officers, the carrier air group commander, the strike operations officer, and the Admiral himself. None of them looked happy. The CAG commander spoke first. Commander Kine, you engaged without clearance. You disobeyed a direct order. You put yourself and your aircraft at risk. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Myra met his eyes. Yes, sir, I'd do it again. The room went quiet. The Admiral leaned forward. Explain. Myra took a breath. Sir, the Marines on the ground were taking fire. They had casualties. I had the ordnance, the fuel, and the position to engage. If I'd waited for clearance, they'd be dead. I made a tactical decision based on the information I had, and I stand by it. The Admiral studied her for a long moment. Then he leaned back. The forward air controller filed a report. He said you saved his squad. Said the enemy was about to overrun their position, and your gun run gave them the time they needed to extract. He also said you stayed on station past Bingo Fuel to make sure they got out safely. Myra didn't respond. The Admiral continued. The problem, Commander, is that you ignored the chain of command. You made a unilateral decision that could have resulted in civilian casualties, collateral damage, or a diplomatic incident, and you did it knowing the consequences. Yes, sir, Myra said. I did. The Admiral stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the flight deck. I'm not going to court-martial you, Commander, but I am going to write a letter of reprimand, and it's going into your file. You're grounded for 2 weeks, pending review. Myra's heart sank. A letter of reprimand meant her career was over. No promotion, no command, no future in the Navy beyond flying a desk until she retired, but she nodded. Understood, sir. The Admiral turned back to face her. But I'm also going to write a letter of commendation, because what you did out there, ignoring the bureaucracy, trusting your instincts, putting the mission and the Marines ahead of your career, that's what leadership looks like, and we need more of it. Myra blinked. Sir, you're dismissed, Commander. Get some rest. You've earned it. Myra saluted, turned, and walked out of the stateroom. She made it halfway down the passageway before her knees buckled and she had to lean against the bulkhead, her breath coming in short gasps, the adrenaline finally crashing. She'd survived. The Marines had survived. And somehow, despite everything, her career had survived too. But the story didn't end there. 3 days later, Myra was in the ready room reviewing mission briefs when the door opened and the sergeant from Camp Pendleton walked in. He wasn't supposed to be on the carrier. Marines didn't belong on Navy ships unless they were in transit. But there he was, in full utilities, his face serious. Commander Kine, Myra looked up. Sergeant, what are you doing here? He held out a small box. The squad wanted me to give you this. Myra opened the box. Inside was a combat action ribbon, the kind Marines earned for engaging the enemy under fire. Beneath it was a handwritten note. You didn't leave us, we won't forget. Myra stared at the ribbon, her throat tight. The sergeant cleared his throat. Ma'am, I owe you an apology. What I did at the briefing, shoving you, disrespecting you, that was out of line. I didn't know who you were, but that's not an excuse. You saved our lives, and I'm sorry. Myra looked up at him. Apology accepted, Sergeant. He nodded, turned to leave, then stopped. Ma'am, for what it's worth, you're the best pilot I've ever worked with, and I've worked with a lot of pilots. Myra smiled. Thank you, Sergeant. That means more than you know. The sergeant left, and Myra sat alone in the ready room, holding the ribbon. She thought about the corporal who shoved her, about the doubters and the skeptics and the people who told her she didn't belong. She thought about the forward air controller screaming into the radio, the muzzle flashes on the ridgeline, the sound of the cannon tearing through the air. And she thought about the decision she made to engage without clearance, to risk everything, to prove that she wasn't just a pilot but a warrior. The ribbon was proof that she'd earned their respect, but respect wasn't the point. The point was that when the moment came, when lives hung in the balance, she didn't hesitate, she didn't flinch, she did her job, and that was all that mattered. 2 weeks later, Myra was back in the cockpit flying combat missions over Afghanistan, and the doubters were gone. The Marines who worked with her didn't question her anymore. They trusted her. And trust, she'd learned, was the only thing worth earning. But the real test was still to come. Because 6 months later, Myra would be handed a mission that no one else wanted, a mission that would push her to the edge of her skills and beyond, a mission that would define her legacy. And when that moment came, she'd be ready. She'd always been ready. The briefing came down on a Tuesday. Myra was in the officers' mess, eating lunch with her squadron mates, when the CAG commander walked in and motioned for her to follow. She set down her tray, followed him into the passageway, and listened as he laid out the mission. We've got a high-value target in the Hindu Kush, he said. Isolated compound, no air support, no backup. The ground element is a SEAL team, and they need CAS on call in case things go sideways. The problem is that the terrain is brutal mountains, valleys, no clear lines of sight. You'll be flying solo, no wingman, and you'll have to stay on station for 4 hours. That's 2 aerial refuelings back-to-back while staying within response distance of the target. Myra nodded. When do I launch? 0400 tomorrow. Get some rest. She didn't rest. She spent the night reviewing maps, studying the terrain, memorizing the radio frequencies and the call signs of the SEAL team she'd be supporting. By the time she strapped into the cockpit the next morning, she knew the mission inside and out. The flight to the Hindu Kush was long and cold, the jet cutting through the darkness at 35,000 feet, the mountains rising beneath her like teeth. She checked in with the SEAL team, confirmed they were on schedule, and began her orbit over the target area. The hours dragged on. 2 aerial refuelings, just like the CAG commander said, the tanker aircraft meeting her over the mountains, the boom operator guiding the probe into the receptacle while Myra held the jet steady in the turbulence. By the 3rd hour, her back was aching, her eyes were burning, and she was running on caffeine and willpower. Then the radio crackled. Sabre 2-1, this is Trident 1-1. We are in contact, requesting immediate CAS coordinates to follow. Myra snapped to attention. Trident 1-1, Sabre 2-1, send it. The coordinates came through, and Myra rolled the jet toward the target. What happened next would become legend. The SEAL team was pinned in a valley, taking fire from 3 sides, and the enemy was closing in. Myra descended through the clouds, her targeting pod locked onto the enemy positions, and began her gun runs. 1 pass, 2, 3. The cannon roared, the shells tore through the mountainside, and the enemy fire slackened. But it wasn't enough. The SEALs were still pinned, still taking casualties, and Myra was running out of ammunition. She keyed her radio. Trident 1-1, Sabre 2-1, I'm Winchester on gun, I've got 1 Sidewinder left, advise. The SEAL team leader's voice came through, calm despite the chaos. Sabre 2-1, we need you to put that Sidewinder on the cave entrance at Grid Whiskey Tango 56789 Enemy is using it as a staging area. If you can collapse it, we can break contact. Myra checked the grid. The cave was 200 meters from the SEAL team's position. Danger close didn't begin to describe it. Trident 1-1, that's danger close, you sure about this? Affirmative, Sabre, we don't have a choice. Myra armed the Sidewinder, locked onto the cave entrance, and fired. The missile streaked down from the sky, slammed into the mountainside, and the cave collapsed in a cascade of rock and dust. The SEAL team moved, broke contact, and disappeared into the mountains. Myra stayed on station until they were clear, then turned for home. By the time she landed, the sun was setting and she was too exhausted to stand. But the SEAL team leader sent her a message. "You didn't leave us, you never do." And Myra knew that everything she'd fought for, everything she'd sacrificed had been worth it, because she'd earned more than respect. She'd earned a legacy, and that legacy would outlive her, outlast the doubters, and prove that competence has no gender, only courage.